is Self-Directed Research. James and Amos are back with hyper-focused deep dives. In this week's episode, Amos presents DRM Schemes, a short history of copy protection. Make sure to like, follow, and subscribe wherever you find us. And as always, visit sdr-podcast.com/episodes for all the presentations, videos, show notes, and transcripts. Stay tuned to the end to hear more about Depot, the sponsor of this episode.
I only have 38 sleighs. I'm Santa. I have 38 sleighs.
RuPaul's Tech Talk with 38 sleighs.
Oh, yeah.
So, James, you got the nice mic and USB interface, and Amanda, you got the nice headphones?
James also has headphones. He's just not wearing them.
I have them. I don't like them. I don't like stuff on my head, and I like only having one earphone in. For editing, I do use them, or when you ask me to review things, I use them, but I don't like them for just chilling. So this is my side.
Wait, who's the sign for?
Me. It's to remind myself to ask questions while you're giving a presentation
to interact more.
Not for what I need.
It's just a reminder for yourself that you're looking at. Okay.
Yeah. It's a reminder to myself to
I see.
Be a good host and not just have the conversation with you.
Cool.
Ooh, audio quality.
Yes. To share it this window. And ha! James, today I want to talk about DRM. Are you ready for that?
There will be no positive or negative audience response to the initial words of DRM.
Yeah, I'm in the free software universe. I have opinions about DRM. I'm usually a protester of DRM. I'm copyleft. I torrented as a child. I now have money to pay for things, except now there's 15 different streaming services, so I don't pay for 15 services, is all I'm going to say on the record about this. But today we're not going to worry too much. There will be one point, but we're going to look into 10 DRM schemes that I think are noteworthy or interesting to talk about. Some are downright fun and completely obsolete, and some are more modern, and I only have 38 slides, so I hope it's going to be a reasonably length one, and we can just kind of recall from our past experiences as younger humans what we interacted with kind of systems, because for me, there's a bunch of nostalgia in these slides, so I hope you enjoy them. As usual, you can get the slides on sdr-podcast.com/episodes, because there's going to be a bunch of photos, of visuals that you don't strictly need, but for maximum nostalgia value, you should go get. Or you can just watch the episode on YouTube.
All copyrighted material, right?
Of course. I did link to, if you download the PDF, I don't know if the presenter notes show up, but I linked to things. So it's going to be in the show notes. They're going to be linked in the show notes because Amanda is the best. Don't keep that in. Just keep that for yourself.
That's also on the record. Yes.
Yes, of course it is. Cool. So a little disclaimer. I've never been a part of any hacker-cracker group. I have not been a part of reversing any of this, so I'm going to get some details wrong. And if you know what's good for you, you will let me be wrong and not correct me, or just do it privately by email if you don't care, whatever you feel safe. But the point is, I will say wrong things. I did a few hours worth of research on each of these, and for most of it, I just wasn't there. I just acted as a consumer. You can send us an email, and some of this still might be illegal in some countries, even though it's ridiculous, but that's the way it is. So
take it for vibes, not reference material.
Exactly. So it's a numbered list, and we're going to work our way to number 1. Number 10 is manual-based copy protection. James, do you have any idea what I'm talking about? Think old video games.
Are you going to quote, there was a Star Wars game that made you look up a table in the manual, and if you got it wrong, it would kill your character or something like that?
That's pretty much it. It's like you have a piece of physical thing. In the example I have on screen now is Operation Stealth from 1990, the year I was born. It was just a colored manual, and the game would show you a black and white version of this kind of abstract, strange illustration, and it would point to an area and ask you what color it is in the manual. And the fun thing is that in 1990, as I understand, I was just born. I wasn't there to check, but I think making a color copy of some page was pretty expensive. So that was sort of effective.
Was this 90s probably post mimeograph, but you're right. Color copies would have been egregiously expensive.
Exactly. Another example, pretty famous one, is the code wheel from the Secret of Monkey Island, where you can rotate. You have faces. It's circular. You can rotate it. You have the upper part of faces and the lower part of faces, and then you have years that are being revealed through rectangular holes in the smaller portion of the disk you can rotate. So again, this is even harder to replicate because you have to do a little. I guess it's not impossible, right? You just disassemble it and photocopy the two, and then do a little bit of. I like the idea that if you really wanted to pirate the game, you had to do a little bit of DIY, just like print two things and cut them and then assemble them so you can rotate them. It's fun. It's like, okay, you wall our game, you're going to have to work for it.
I sort of love this with copy protection because this is more on software than on media, but like as someone who's writing a piece of software that is probably going to have a license and I have to do some kind of checking for the paid version of it, I know that by the time that someone owns the software and they're running it on their computer that I have no control on, and I'm not whatever video game company that's going to do kernel level anti-cheat for it.
We're getting there, James.
you only like there's only so far you can go, and if most people are not going to do an arts and crafts project to crack your code, let alone poke around in the software. So I kind of love the, if I made you do an arts and crafts project and that's how you cracked my software, I'm not too upset about that.
Exactly. Here's another fun one. It's called lens lock. I don't know if you've ever seen that. I haven't. It's
this is one I've never seen.
It's a little piece of red plastic with a weird lens on it, a transparent plastic with properties that kind of deflect various portions of the screen. So there's two views on the slide we can see. We can see a view from the side where we see kind of gibberish, a little bit of pixels. They're not really pixels. They're character size. We're talking even earlier than MS-DOS. This is probably, I don't know. The characters remind me of some other computer, but it's optical. You place it physically on the screen and then it modifies what you see and it kind of decrypts it. People have re-implemented lens lock in software, so you just give it the image and it just does the transform that it would physically do. But that's kind of amazing because the previous two, okay, you can find a color copier, just write down the colors of things, or you can assemble your little wheel. But good luck freaking building a lens. And that's probably super cheap for them to do because, not super cheap.
It's injection molded plastic. As long as you're making 10,000 of them, it's whatever.
This one showed up in my research today. I didn't know about it earlier. And it's just so fun. It's just like this weird little object that I think you would misplace immediately.
Yeah, it'd be gone. Yeah, you'd have a little brher or something who would like melt it, and then you'd be like, oh no, I can't play my game now.
Honey, I disposed of the packaging because you forgot to. It's like, oh! Okay, number 9, we have serial keys. Everybody knows and loves serial keys. Here's probably the most famous serial key. I think it's famous enough. I shit you not, I asked ChatGPT, hey, give me the Windows XP serial key that is public knowledge, and like it's everywhere because it starts with FCK GW. There's going to be an explicit rated episode. It's fuck gates and Windows.
Okay.
Yeah. That's what it meant. Okay, so basically the way serial keys work is you don't have a list of valid keys in the program, right? You just have some algorithm that checks a string for some property. It does some computation with the letters, and that checks a property that holds true for a very large number of keys. And the key space is very, very large. You can see there's 5 times 5 of like how many?
25 times 36 or something like that if it's all letters and numbers.
It's all letters and numbers. So yeah, 36 exactly. So it's a large key space. Most of them are invalid, but there's also no need. There was no need for the software to phone home. You could just run a little bit of code, compute, and be like, okay, that's a correct serial key. But it also for OEMs, it has the nice property that if everybody ends up using the same key, you can trace it back to the person who shared their key. If you know which store they bought it from, because we used to buy software in brick and mortar store, and we used to call stores brick and mortar store. They physically go somewhere and they go, oh, it's like John Smash bought this copy of Windows and then shared the key with everyone.
Egghead Software. I don't know. That was a popular company in the US. I have no idea
what just made it up.
No. That's that was one of the bigger software retailers like before Best Buy and stuff even were popular. Wow. I don't know. I remember having catalogs and stuff for Egghead Software.
That's okay. That's crazy. Of course, the thing is, because it's just a simple algorithm, you can just make a program that generates any number of valid keys for a software, and then you can't trace it back to the person who leaked their keys because it's just essentially you reverse engineer the executable. You find the code that's responsible for checking if a key is valid, and then you figure out what's the property is checking for, and then you can just generate as many keys as you want. And I've included two random. I don't even know if those are real. Man, it's so hard to find things on the internet nowadays. Half the things are generated. X-Force and Enderman. They usually play a nice little bit of chiptune music, so I remember those fondly.
This is the SoundCloud of an entire genre of music. Like,
it was.
This is where a ton of chiptune, or I forget what genre. There's a specific name for like the tracker files that people would put in this, because you could put a whole like
just mods
audio track in there. Yeah.
Number 8 is PlayStation schemes. So there's a bunch of them. The PlayStation is really fun, and the first one I want to talk about is the wobble. PlayStation was a disc-based console, so you had discs that actually looked like this. We're going to get back to that. Inside it, like, I think in the inner rings, there was special data that's an encrypted string that read like SCEA or SCE or SCEI, the Sony Computer Entertainment for various regions. And the PlayStation was able to read that. But if you try to copy the disc with a computer, because we had disc readers, we had the CD burners, then it wouldn't replicate that. And then the console would know that it's a pirated game and not actually play it. The problem is that you could just put in a legitimate disc and then swap it with a pirate disc afterwards, after the check was done. And so it was actually completely defeated just like that.
Hang on a second. Okay, so I used to have a PlayStation when I was younger, and my ex-stepdad's brother, whatever, don't ask, did something in the PlayStation so that we could play these pirated games.
I'm getting to it. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I had a story about my Spyro, the third one.
Yeah. This is gonna
Are we getting there?
This is gonna, yes.
Am I ruining your slides?
Yeah.
Holy smokes. First time.
That's the sign that I'm making it relatable, finally.
To me specifically. Thank you. Okay, continue.
Long time listener, first time spoiler.
Exactly.
So that's the wobble. And another funny thing was that I would call that the bottom of the CDs, like the part that is actually written on and read, it was black for PS1 games. Actually, not all, like there's just the first ones, I think. And that's not really an anti-copying measure, because you can read them exactly like normal ones, but it's more like an anti-counterfeiting measure, because if you just burn them a regular CD and then you try to sell that, people are going to see that it's not black. Unfortunately, the market answered that, and people started selling black
CDRs. They came in all kinds of colors too.
Yeah, exactly. There's going to be a link in the show notes with a page exclusively about the different kind of dyes that you can put in CDs and DVDs to make them different colors. Here's another fun one. It's called LibCrypt. So LibCrypt works differently than the wobble, and the idea is that CDs are physical media. You can have bumps and grooves. I forget the exact physical layer of what's happening. You have zeros and ones essentially, but then it's organized in sectors, and then there's a file system on there, and there's files you can read. But you can put things in between the file records, right? You can put data that if you read it in a computer, it would ignore that. It would just, I don't know, it's not in the dictionary. That's how file system work, right? You have some sort of, what would you call that? An index? It's like this file is at that
it'd be
place.
like hiding data in like padding gaps, more or less.
Yeah, exactly. And so when you make a copy of the CD, that data is not copied over, and the game actually checks for that. So it sees that it's a copy, and it just says no. But once again, here's the screenshot with Spyro, Amanda. People have come up with fixes for that. There's basically two options. You can either patch the game itself. So let's say you own a copy of Spyro. You can rip it from your computer. So you put it in the CD reader and read everything that's on it. That's going to read everything but the special data that libcrypt is looking for. And then you can patch the code to just not check for that. So same thing as, what did you talk about earlier? No, actually, well, we haven't talked about it, but in keygens, you can also just remove the part of the code that checks for the zeroth key. It was pretty much that simple back then.
Yeah, because that's one of those problems. If you have a function that returns a bool like is valid or is false, you can often just return true is a much smaller piece of code than the actual checking. Yep. So like that's how a lot of like binary patching works, is you find the one place where it says like, have you checked and is it valid? And you just say, yes, we're good. Like, and that's one of those fun things with, especially with like optimizing compilers. If you try and do something more clever, the compiler will be like, oh, at the end, this just boils down to a binary comparison. So I'll get rid of your whatever and we'll just say, yes, return true. And it's way easier to patch.
But you have to be able to reverse or debug the binary, which can get complicated. We'll get to that. So option 1 is to patch the game, just remove the checks altogether. And option 2 is to patch the console. You had this little thing called mod chips. They're very simple. I don't actually know what's in there, but we can see on the slide they're very small. And you just connect them to various pins on the motherboard of the console. And then ta-da, you can play games from any region, because the game used to be region locked. That was before the internet. It let you, I don't know, it defeated copy protection, so it let you play burnt copies of PS1 games and whatnot. And there were even people who offered mod chip install services. You could order, they could send in your PS1, pay them a certain amount, and then you get your console back in the mail a week later with a mod chip installed. But they stopped doing it. The one I found stopped doing it in 2021. So I'm 4 years too late, unfortunately.
Yeah, a lot of these either work by replacing the firmware of a piece of that's doing the checking, or they'll do certain things like glitching, where when they detect like, you're talking to the DRM chip, right before you ask it, is this good or not? Because there'll be a similar like digital version of like asking the chip, who maybe has a view of all the data that's coming in or gets fed the signature of something, and it'll return a signal like low or high for good or bad. It'll either glitch the chip or it'll just overpower the response from that chip and like set the electrical signal high or low. Like there's more modern ones of like this for every console, but the ones that I've seen most recently for like the Switch are based on like the RP2040 like from Raspberry Pi, because it's relatively fast. It can like sniff the entire communication and right where it needs to come in and like, you know, override the actual chip on there and says, yep, all good, checks out.
Yep, and it used to be that I think like the older versions of PS1s were easier to mod, so they were higher priced and rare, and people fought to get them. But now there's more modern mod chips, and I don't know, the mod chip scene has kept evolving, and it's I don't follow that scene. I don't know the developments. It's all enthusiasts talking on forums. And it's not very legal. I don't know which part of it is legal. Let's.
I am not a lawyer, so we won't weigh in on that.
Cut this whole thing. That's a mistake. Yeah. Next.
It is very difficult as someone who ships hardware to like, software is already hard because you put software out there and then anyone can spend as much time as they want trying to break it and manipulate the environment. Hardware is even worse because you have to make them tens of thousands or hundreds or millions of units at a time, which means even if today you know there's a problem, there's so much momentum before you can put in a new version of the hardware, and all the ones that are out there and sold are gone, you know. And if there's something fundamental like that where you can't detect that from software because you're only looking, is this good or is this not good, like it is a one-sided arms race when it comes to that kind of thing.
Number 7 is break the game. So a lot of copy protection / anti-piracy measures try to prevent you from playing altogether, but some game developers are sadistic a little more. They're like, okay, you can play, but you can't win. An example is Serious Sam 3, where they have these monsters called Adult, I forget what they're called, Adult something? And basically, if they detect that you're playing a pirated copy of the game, which could be as simple as like they uploaded a pirated copy of the game on torrent websites and seeded it, and now that's the main version that goes around. Then they spawn an invincible, very fast-moving version of that enemy early on in the game, and you can't go past that. That was a pretty famous example. We have a nice high-resolution picture of that creature here, and I can't believe I forget what it's called. I think it's an adult scorpion. I think that's the name. Another example.
My favorite one of these. Exactly. This is exactly my favorite.
Another example is Game Dev Tycoon, who did the same thing, essentially. Detected if you're playing a pirate copy, because I have the headline from Eurogamer here. 93.6% of players currently running cracked copy. That's in 2017. Imagine releasing a game and you can tell from analytics that 94% of people are playing a pirated copy. I mean, back when
That's not uncommon. I've seen that from multiplayer games and stuff, because that'll be a problem, especially for multiplayer games, is because people will log onto the servers, so they're using money for the servers you're running. Like, it's not even like zero cost to the developer because you still have to run servers, but they could tell that like 95, 1 out of, whatever are actual paid users.
I was going to say, unless playing the game actually costs you something, like in the case of multiplayer games, like you said, for single player games, back when I was in the game dev scene or around the game dev scene, because I worked at itch, what we told ourselves was like, people who pirate the games are probably not people who would have bought the game anyway. So it's not really a lost sale. It's kind of more exposure and they talk about it. So it's you're not really trying to get every one of those like 94% of people to convert to paying customers, because they're not paying customers. They're just, I don't know. So they had a mode where if they detected you were playing a pirated copy of Game Dev Tycoon, everything was so much harder because it's a game about making games and selling them. So in game, it wouldn't sell. You would make games and nobody would buy them for some reason. And you would get weird notifications. And people noticed and it became a whole thing. And a year later, because people started liking it and considered it a challenge, they added it as an advanced option. You can opt into pirate mode because it's so much harder. I'm reading from the options here. It says the pirate mode causes severely reduced sales on all of your games. Bankruptcy is likely. You can develop copy protection, but using it will upset fans. Fan mail, quote, inspired by true events, will reach your inbox from time to time. So they leveraged all the hate mail that they got from doing that in the first place to add this as an extra feature on the game. And if you go on YouTube and you search Game Dev Tycoon pirate mode, you'll see people trying to finish the game with that mode, and they did.
This has to be some kind of like therapy or catharsis for the devs. Like the only way that you can is making lemonade out of lemons, I guess, is all
nature
it can be.
giving us peppers. It's like capsaicin, the thing that makes the body go no, and we humans are like, I'm gonna eat all of it. I'm gonna get used to that. I'm gonna eat the hottest pepper I can find. And nature's like, no, I made this specifically so you wouldn't touch it.
My defense mechanism, no.
Number 6, we have Macrovision. So I was not alive for this one. I regret to tell you. I don't know. Do you know what it is, James? Have you heard that before?
No, I don't think so.
It's for VHS. So we're going to be looking at analog signals here. So we have on the slide, which you can get at sdr-podcast.com/episodes, in case you've missed that. We can see an oscilloscope reading of signals. Yeah. So the way VHS works is it scans the screen from left to right and top to bottom. So you get signals for colors as it scans the screen. You get scan lines and everything. So you get all the different points, which is fun because it means you don't really have a resolution horizontally. Like it's just kind of a continuous thing. There's a number of lines, but then every line is kind of continuous because it's an analog signal. So that's fun. But then between every frame, there's a vertical blanking interval where you don't have any data. It's just, I don't know exactly what should go on there. I don't know if it's just like 0 or 1 or something in between or some pattern so that it can synchronize. But basically their idea for copy protection is let's put a bunch of impulses during that vertical blanking interval, which is going to mess with the automatic brightness control of VCRs built in the 1980s. Oh. So you can find on YouTube, and there's going to be a link to a YouTube video in the show notes because Menda's the best, where you can see that if you played a copy protected tape on one of the VCR, you try to copy it, you would see the brightness of the screen moving a lot. You would see a lot of noise. Some VCRs completely bugged out and were not able to detect V-blanks, so you just see the image scrolling up and down rapidly. The consensus on that is that it was a pretty bad idea and it didn't work very well. And very, very, very soon, just every piece of hardware started ignoring it, because the idea was that also if you played a tape into a recorder to copy it, the recorder would recognize that those signals in the V-blank from Macrovision and be like, I can't copy that. But then someone just made recorders that ignored those signals, and they're like, okay, you can copy everything. They even made double deckers where you could have the source tape and then the destination tape in the same. You'd have two slots in the same machine just to copy cassettes easier. And yeah, it's fun because like it's been rejected by everyone so quickly. This is what it seems like from 2025 when you research that. I'm sure it was more complicated back then, but what it looks like with hindsight is that people just ignored the signals, because you have the entire clear signal, right? You just have to ignore the thing that goes on in the V-blank. It's not like it's encrypted or anything. It's just garbage in between frames. So just ignore that.
Yeah, and I mean, people aren't going to get that explanation, so they're going to be like, my TV is bad or my VCR is bad. Not like I'm using a pirated copy, which means then the VCR, like the recorders and players or the TVs themselves are motivated to be robust against that, because then people don't complain and return their TVs or take them in for service or whatever. It becomes a feature like, we can play pirated movies too. Macrovision resistant.
Yeah. Plus, I don't know who was behind this exactly and what kind of power they had to enforce it, like force makers of VCRs to implement that properly. And we'll see that that's been a big factor later on for number 5, which is CSS. CSS not for cascading style sheets, but for content scramble system. James, how much do you know about this?
I've heard of it, but I have no idea how it works. Is this the one that was used for...
Do you know who this is? That's DVD John. Or Jan Leg Johansen from Norway.
Exactly.
So when it was 16, Jan figured out how CSS works, which is the original encryption scheme for DVD, which made it so that you couldn't copy DVDs easily, because VHS was so easy to copy. As I mentioned, you just plug the output of one to the input of the other in a recorder, and that was it. But DVD, they were like, now we're going to encrypt the content. We're going to have the players decrypted. It's going to be wonderful. They used 40-bit keys to encrypt, which was already ridiculous back then. And someone messed up. The company who released Xing DVD, a DVD player for Windows, forgot to obfuscate or encrypt their decryption key. It was just in plain, in memory or even in the executable. So Jan found it and figured out the rest of the algorithm. And then suddenly everyone could play DVDs on Linux. Because here's the thing, this wasn't a big move of we're going to be able to crack all the DVDs. It was no, a bunch of people were like, we can't read DVDs on Linux, because back then it was not as accepted as it is now. I guess it was still Linux on the desktop.
No one sold a DVD player.
I want to say it wasn't as good as it is now, but is it good now?
Well, I don't know. I'm back on Mac, so I'll let you know in 5 years when I get upset at Mac and go back to Linux, because every 5 years I switch between the two. But
let's just say back then that it never would have been possible to have official support for DVD playback on Linux. There was definitely no industry interest. This was even before Loki Games, the team that ported games to Linux commercially. It was a wild time. I was actually alive and using Linux on the desktop for that one. So I remember having to install libdvd CSS to play DVDs. And this was a whole thing. This became a whole case because essentially Jan was attacked in justice. He got put on trial in Norway because the MPAA, the Motion Picture something Association, and
Association of America.
Copyright, the DVD CCA, two American organizations told Norway, hey, that's not cool. And the problem with America is that it's kind of a superpower. So when they say that's not cool, you kind of have to, okay, fine, we'll just put people in prison, I guess. But he was 16, so that didn't help. He was eventually acquitted. He got out. But it became kind of, what's the term I'm looking for? It was made as an example of no, this is free speech. This is free speech. And people have tried to print the source code, including the key of the CSS decryption code on shirts, because they were like, if you can put it on a shirt, then it has to be speech, right? And speech is protected by the First Amendment in the US. So you can't just go sue people for speaking. And so there were a lot of different legal cases around that, and it was a whole thing. And a bunch of companies were sued out of existence because this t-shirt used to be sold by Copyleft Limited, and I've checked on their website and it's not online. So I'm assuming they're not doing well.
One of the early famous examples of this is the US used to limit export. They used to treat cryptography like a weapon.
Yes, exactly.
And so export of cryptography was illegal under the ITAR. ITAR is the law. And someone said, well, they put an implementation of a stronger than allowable cryptography algorithm on a t-shirt as a Perl script, exactly like this on a t-shirt. Yep. And it became, I think, the court case that set the precedence here of if it's information and you can print it and send it, it is, it becomes a free speech issue exactly like this.
Mm-hmm. I remember back then because you could install some Debian packages, but they warned you, hey, this is illegal in the US. And I was like, I'm in France, I don't care. But it's kind of crazy. Yeah, I don't have the specifics. Again, you can go dig on Wikipedia. We could make a special episode about exporting weapons of war across country borders, because that's what encryption was considered as. Number 4 is Widevine L3. I should have reorganized those. Widevine is interesting. It's Google's DRM protection for audio-video content. Microsoft has a different one. It's called PlayReady, I think, and Apple has Fair Play. I think.
Yeah. Now we're getting into the contemporary ones.
We are. Widevine is interesting because I meant to talk about CSS. One of the problems was that they did not implement revocation at all. So if one of the keys leaked, it was over, and that's what happened. So for AACS, the Blu-ray equivalent, they kind of learned their lessons, and they were like, okay, we can rotate keys, we can revoke things when they leak. So then it becomes an arms race of like finding more keys that haven't been revoked yet. And it's kind of the same thing with Widevine, except with a lot more things going on, a lot more levels of obfuscation. And this idea of level is also new. I'm specifically talking about Widevine L3, which is only up to 720p content, and it allows doing decryption in software, and so it's more vulnerable than Widevine L1. L2 doesn't matter, just pretend it doesn't exist. L1, where everything is done in hardware, and the GPU, all the keys are still in hardware, and you can't really, it's so much harder to break L1 than it is to break L3. So L3 was broken a bunch of times, actually. One of the times was from the Widevine cdm.dll file, version 4.10.1610.0. And there's a nice, very, very long write-up on how they did it, how they reversed it. It's fascinating. I'm not going to go in details here, but there's a link to it in the show notes, and you should go read it because it's fascinating. There's a bunch of anti-debugging tricks used in the DLL. One of them is interrupt 2D, which does something different in debuggers than it does in regular code, and it's annoying. Another thing they do is they just take a function and break it into a bunch of different basic blocks. So just add jumps all over the place for no reason. So when you disassemble them, you get a lot of small little rectangles that jump all over the place, and it makes it harder to follow what's going on. But when you read the write-up, I haven't done a lot of reversing like that. So for me, reading those is always very, very fun because they go through the code, and there's like this big sprawling graph of control flow. And they're like, well, that code obviously is inflate from libsid. Like they're just like, oh, that's inflate. Oh, that's OpenSSL. They're just like from mental memory, from just recall, they just know what the code looks like. And that's the closest we'll ever get to like real life matrix. Like I can see through the zeros and ones. I'm like, I've seen that binary before. That looks familiar.
That is one of the cool things about using compilers from high-level languages is that compilers have habits the same way that people do. And so like they will code gen specific things in specific ways. And so you start seeing those patterns and you go, yep, that's a mem copy. Like that's I can see some of those on ARM. You go like, okay, yeah, I see what they're doing there.
Mem copy is even worse because it goes the other way. If you try to implement your own mem copy, the compiler will recognize that this looks like a mem copy and replace it with the optimized mem copy that it has as an intrinsic. Mem copy is the worst.
Exactly.
Still on that topic, I wanted to signal boost an article from Matthew Garrett, a recent one, I think, unless I just passed out for a year, called "The GPU, Not the TPM, is the Root of Hardware DRM." The Free Software Foundation has been leading a campaign for a long time called Defective by Design, and it's kind of trying to inform people on what DRM is, how it's preventing, it's getting in the way of freedoms, like you bought something, you should be able to access it. It's trying to control when and where you can play and enjoy what you bought. So on principle, I'm very much on the side of the FSF and the Defective by Design campaign. However, they got something technical very wrong. And that's what the article from Matthew Garrett is explaining. They were focused on the TPM, the thing that you have to have if you want to run Windows 11 unmodified. And essentially, the FSF argued that the TPM was the reason that we have hardware DRM for video and audio. And actually, it's not. It's in the GPU. So it's an interesting technical article. You can go read it because I learned a bunch of things. Again, I don't know the details of that. The thing is that there's actually very few people who know the details of that. There's people who work at GPU manufacturers, people who work on the Windows team, people who work on like browser media teams. It's a handful of people around the world who have to care about those details. And everyone else is just using code given to them by other company, licensed by other companies to just try to make their content less pirated, I suppose.
I was going to say, there's a post. Have you heard of Frack Magazine?
I don't think so.
So Frack Magazine is like one of the old school like hacking web zines, and I think it didn't publish for a while, but people have been starting it up. It's
Frack with PH, right?
Yeah, PHRACK, and I think it started publishing again. But there's another person I follow. He's David Buchanan or Retroid on Blue Sky. The cool thing about Frack is now you can like submit articles and things like that, and he did a really good breakdown of a lot of these current encryption schemes. I think it was a little bit before Matthew Garrett's post, but talking about like some ways to break this, because like you said, there's not a lot of people who understand this, and sometimes the way that they're implemented is just kind of silly in that like it's kind of like all the ways that you can mess up encryption. It'll look encrypted on the wire, but you realize you can just be like, oh, here, if I just say it's unencrypted, then all of a sudden that'll get passed along the rest of the chain and an unencrypted signal will pop out the other side. And he did a really good breakdown in Frack and also did some analysis on the FSF post around the time that Matthew Garrett was doing it. But he's one of those people who's like, will take apart the entire system just to figure out how it works. So he's a good one to follow if you're interested in that, because he writes really well on that.
Number 3, hardware dongles. That one's fun. James, I don't know if you ever owned one of these. On the screen right now, we have the iLok generations 1, 2, and 3. I had one of those because I had east-west sounds that were shipped to me on a 3 terabyte hard disk drive that I connected via IDE, I think, at the time. They were the complete composers collection. And you had this USB stick that you had to plug in your computer to be able to use the software, and your license was on there. They still sell that hard disk drive today, but it's now an external hard disk. It's an external SSD, most likely, and you connect it over USB. And there's a listing here from Tom, and you can buy the disk for $120 without the license. You can't use any of what's on there if you don't have the license. This is just the disk, because it's 3 terabytes of sounds, and for people, it's just... You're not going to sit there and just download 3 terabytes. They're just going to order it. It's going to get in the mail in a few days. And that's it. And you can take it everywhere you go.
I've not used these license keys, but you see this a lot in like niche engineering development tools, where they'll usually give you the option between some software program you have to run locally, like a license management server that you have to run and gets authorized and you have so many seats, or for some very large flat amount, they'll sell you a USB key or a serial port key or something that you plug in, and it will only work when that's attached. And that gets used a lot in industry for like programming machines or stuff that is air gapped, because like that's their solution for air gapped things, is that you pay $5-10 grand for one of these as the expensive alternative to like a $2,000 a year per seat floating license server kind of thing.
Yeah, because the alternative to that is having always on DRM, where something phones home regularly. But if you can't have that, then you can just have a piece of physical hardware that's... I don't know what makes it so hard to reverse, honestly, but it's a black box, essentially. You can see what's being sent, you can see what's being received, you don't know what's happening on the chip, and you can't just attach a debugger to the circuit, I suppose.
It's like a lot of smart cards and stuff. So usually they'll have some protections in silicon, so they can detect if you're like, if you remove the lid off the circuit, or sometimes even just open the box, what'll happen at like... this gets used a lot in credit card systems. So credit card systems have very similar copy protections, so that they like, because they download keys so that they can sign transactions, but they want to be tamper resistant. So they'll have a bunch of different protections. Like one might be the plastic of the case presses a button, so when you open the plastic of the case, it releases the button, and that cuts the power to the RAM, which means it loses the keys. Or they'll have a mesh on, so like on the PCB, they'll have essentially a web of copper, and they'll have essentially capacitive touch sensors on there. So if you touch it or cut any of the traces while you're trying to get in there, it also will kill the power and it'll cut the RAM. So there's a bunch of like, none of them are...
That reminds me of changing the battery in my car remote, and then it lost the programming.
It's like that, but more sensitive, yeah.
I had to look up online from some shady website the procedure to reprogram the key just using the car and an existing key. I didn't actually need the existing key. You just do something silly like turn the key on and off 3 times and then slam the driver's side door. And I was like, for sure someone's fucking with me. That's not actually the procedure. But it was, and it worked.
This is like your Bluetooth episode. Just press all the buttons enough times and you'll figure out how to get it into pairing
But I
mode.
expect that from a pair of cheap Bluetooth headphones. I done it, like slamming this driver's side car. I was like, there's no way this works. But I have to, because otherwise you go to the dealership and they bill you $100 just to do that while you're not looking. Number 2 is the Denuvo anti-tamper. I think a lot of people hate that one, but actually... I think it's a lot less terrible than what was before, Star Force or whatever. There's a bunch of ROM something there. I haven't researched too many, because those are the sad ones. I wanted the happy take on DRM. Pretty much what Denuvo does, it's not technically DRM or anti-piracy software, it's anti-tamper, but for software. You just talk about physical anti-tamper mechanism. This is for software. And the idea is not to prevent completely to a game from being cracked, so that it's distributed on pirate sites. You can download it, you can play it without having to buy it, without having to have a license for it. The objective here is to just delay the pirates. If you can have 2, 3, 4, 6 weeks where there's no pirated copies of the game available. The only option is to buy it. And during that short window, you can market the heck out of the game and spend a lot of advertising budget. You convert a bunch of people to paying customers, because there's not every pirate is potentially a paying customer, but some are. Some are just like, well, if it's just one click away, yeah, I'll play for free. But if buying is the only option, you feel like you're missing out, all your friends are playing it, you want to join a game, you can't. That's what Denuvo is here for. So there's been a lot of conspiracy, but I think this is kind of back to the making you do a little DIY project, except the little DIY project, there's a lot of reversing, because there's not just one check you can disable. I think a lot of the code runs in some sort of VM, and there's a lot of checks everywhere, and every release of the game is different. So when you crack one, they just release another. It's I have zero experience reversing Denuvo, but I know some teams do it, and it's kind of a sport. So it makes it fun
like
again.
You were saying, for those 4 to 6 weeks, for a lot of those AAA games, like 80 or 90% of the sales of all the sales they will ever make on those games are in the first 4 to 6 weeks. So like someone's actually done I've seen a couple articles that analyze that, of like what the typical sales curve is for those games. And they're like, well, yeah, you can kind of see why it'll get broken. But if it makes it those 2 to 6 weeks, like that could mean a lot. Yeah. I could totally understand the desire there.
And number one is the whole reason I made this numbered list. It's my first numbered list, and I'm a YouTuber, so please admire the restraints. I waited for 2025 to make a numbered list. Number one is AB variant watermarking. And I have found documentation. There's going to be a link in the show notes of some vendor that boasts about it. But originally someone told me about it at a Rust event. They approached me and they talked about it, and I was like, is it secret? Can you tell me? They're like, oh yeah, we're going to this and that. It would be very fun if they are listening to this episode and recognize themselves. But it's available online, so I can talk about it. It's not an industry secret. Basically, the aim of this is, let's assume there's the World Cup going on and it's being streamed in a bunch of legally available ways, but you have to pay to see it. You have to be a paid subscriber of some TV channel, of some website or whatever. It's pay per, I don't know. You have to pay. But some people are like, well, I can see it on my computer, which means I can capture the screen of my computer, which means I can rebroadcast it for free on Twitch or whatever. And then what they have to do is just find those streams and squash them, right? They probably have a red telephone all the way to Twitch being like, nuke that stream. But that's not enough, because they're just going to start another stream with another account and another IP or whatever. So what you want to do is you want to find who is doing the rebroadcasting and cancel their paid accounts, because they're violating the terms of their subscription to whatever paid streaming service they have. So there are ways to do that. There's something called steganography, which lets you add some hidden data to an image. It's not visible by eye, but for example, if you do some crimes and you use a copier, and then the papers have little marks on them that can tell the cops which copier you used, and so it's it's easier to track you.
Yeah, so I, like steganography, yeah, you can look at either like the statistical things where you're like, stuff that would be imperceptible to humans, or just like on the margins, or I've seen this with audio, or I've heard this with audio as well before, where there was someone who was doing detection of AI generated audio because he realized, I think I have to go look this up. I think he had noticed that the LLMs were trained on low quality compressed audio from places like YouTube, because that's where they could steal it from. And so he could hear the generated audio was reproducing compression artifacts, but in ways that a compressor would never do. Like it was like producing them as if they were sound, and they're outside of the normal auditory like hearing range of most humans, either like high frequency or just subtle enough that it wouldn't bug you, but you could pick it up statistically. And then, like you were saying, the other thing for watermarking, that was the other thing of printers. Every time you print on a document, they put like their serial number in very light yellow ink. Yep. And that's how a bunch of counterfeiters have been caught, even beyond like the constellation mark stuff, where scanners won't scan money if they have a certain pattern in them where they'll just refuse to scan or print it. But even when you print, it'll put something in there where you print enough bills and one of them will have a watermark on it, and they'll find exactly the serial number of your printer, and they can usually figure out where that was sold, or at least the general area where that was sold and what distributor sold it to you.
I think you just ruined a lot of people's get-rich-quick scheme. I was like, you mean I can't just print dollar bills in my inkjet? So back to AB variant watermarking. So you have steganography. You can hide information in images that are not visible to the naked eye. So someone watching some movie on Disney Plus or Netflix or whatever is not going to be able to tell that something's in there. That's the whole point. But if you capture the stream, you can get that information out. Now, the question is, you have thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of subscribers. Are you really going to insert a unique watermark per subscriber per stream? That's a lot of compute. Encoding a live 1080p stream or 4K stream or whatever is computationally expensive. You don't want to do it once per customer. Also, that completely defeats caching. The idea is usually you have some sort of origin server, and then you have some sort of structure where it spreads to edge servers, and those have caches, memory caches, disk caches that serve the content to a lot of users around the globe. If everyone's getting their own unique copy of the content with their own little watermark just for them, it doesn't work. So what do? You do exactly 2 variants of the source media, and then you serve everyone a mix, like you serve someone like maybe AABAB, and that's a binary number. So James is nodding firstly. When the person who explained this to me got to this one, I was like, oh, that's so clever. You only have to have exactly 2 copies of the stream.
Yeah, I was about to ask you, I was like, wait a minute, are they...
This is just binary encoding.
Yeah, they're doing like binary splitting where it's like you do it, you split them regionally. But yeah, I guess you could re-encode a number by like phase shift keying, basically. But yeah, exactly that kind of thing where you end up... You've done a whole series of videos on blocked compression caching and like how...
Exactly. You're already doing that is the thing. When you do video streaming, you're already slicing things in different...
In like 5 or 10 or 30 second segments and things like that. So if you vary 32 times 30 seconds or whatever, so over the course of 16 minutes, you can get a 4 billion identifiers or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. But you don't have 4 billion subscribers and the segments are more like 1-2 seconds, so it's fine.
Yeah.
And it's all cacheable. Like, okay, your edge nodes have to cache twice as much data, but it's all pre-computed at the origin. It's very smart. It's very clever. I hate DRM as a consumer. I think it's wrong. I think it sucks because it's an explicit episode. I can say sucks, but that's so clever. I just kind of like it. I was like, wow.
You can appreciate good engineering in silly things.
Exactly.
And the other, you were talking about clever, and you talked about people restreaming this to Twitch. One of the most clever, it's dumb clever, but one of the most dumb clever things I've seen is someone was streaming some like Euro Cup or World Cup game on Twitch. But what they did is they put themselves in like the OBS overlay in the corner like most video game streamers do. And they're just sitting there holding the controller. And it looked almost like they were playing a FIFA game. But it was like the actual World Cup behind them. And they managed to stay online for
on YouTube,
way longer.
You can find so many videos trying to defeat watermarking. They're going to have the image upside down. They're going to have the sound stretched to 96%.
Weird lines in the middle of the picture.
Yeah. My favorite is no copyright infringement intended in the description by 14-year-olds.
Email me if you're a license holder.
Exactly.
I will take it down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's all I got for you today, James.
Nice. Yeah, I'm somewhat interested. Like I said, I'm about to ship a paid app, and it's interesting of how far do I want to go? Because like every hour I spend on like license check stuff is hour that I'm not building features. Yeah. But if it's ridiculously easy to copy and paste, then it's like, well, I've spent months building this, and like I'm a single person developer on it, so I would like to be paid for it. So
what platforms are you shipping for?
Windows, Mac, and Linux.
Because I was thinking earlier today, that the reason the Mac has so many nice little apps is that Apple platforms attract people with a product mindset. Not necessarily they want to get rich and famous and like entrepreneurs type, but just like they like the product. They like the experience. They want the installation to be nice. They want the app to look nice, to be functional. They have this idea of like design purity. They just like the product. And it's a wild overgeneralization. I'm going to make everyone angry with that. But like, on the Linux side, not so much. It's more like I want access to everything for free. I want to be able to modify everything. It's strongly on the freedoms and everything. But there's not that idea of the neat little package product. Yeah, on Mac, every time you want to do something, you got to buy a $20 app. But it's usually really nice. And most of them are maintained because they can actually make money from it. So I'm enjoying a bunch of those right now.
There's something to be said about implicit customer selection, marketing towards a collection of
That's
people.
What I was getting at. I was like, I don't know that a lot of those Mac apps actually have measures in place to prevent piracy. I'm not sure about that, but it never even occurred to me because it's only $20. So as a professional expense in the context of running a company, it's nothing. Personally, like if I was a student, I would totally not be on Mac because I couldn't afford a Mac in the first place.
Yeah, the other side is that Macs generally have some of the highest requirements regarding code signing and things like that. I had to figure out how to sign a Mac app and submit it for notarization and stuff like that. And I guess people can still turn, a system integrity protection off and things like that. But I think most people, especially people who are using Macs in corporate settings, won't be able to turn that off. But the challenge for me in this, so I'm definitely going to be selling on Mac because I'm developing on Mac, but I also expect people to run this on like embedded Linux systems and things like that, like people who are shipping 10,000 devices and things like that. So it does need to run on Linux, and you really have no control over what a Linux user does with their system. And, there's not much to be done there. So the way I've been looking at it is it keeps honest people honest, and people who weren't, we're going to find a way anyway. And you can't really stress about that. Like you're saying with piracy, there's a Twitch streamer, Pirate Software. I forget his actual name, but he's a game developer person, but he has a pretty big opinion of like piracy is just a logistics issue, or he says it a certain way, but like for different markets that have different currencies and stuff like that, a $60 game would be egregious. Like it would be a huge amount of their monthly or yearly salary. So like selling to different price points in different markets is a really big thing. Yeah. And then not stressing over people who are just going to pirate the game. But a lot of it comes down to like, you need to make it easy for people to get the stuff, and it has to be at a price point that they can reasonably expect to enjoy, because not everyone has the purchasing power of the US and Western Europe. But this is
market specific pricing is a big thing. I learned that recently, but everyone has been using the Turkish price for YouTube Premium until they finally,
is it a lower?
Because it was $2 a month. I've been paying 24 like some sort of asshole, but yeah.
I think I have a family plan, so I don't know.
do. That's what. Yeah, they keep bumping it up. It's gonna become not worth it at some point. As a YouTube consumer, I'm very angry. As a YouTube partner, I don't see any of the money, so I don't know what the heck's going on.
You see from YouTube,
but I don't see like every time they bump the price, I don't see an increase in my income.
Oh yeah. You don't get
Where's that money
don't get
going?
A bumped rev share. Yeah,
the benefits are passed on to the shareholders. I just need to buy some YouTube stock. All right, that's all. Bye, James.
Bye, Amos. This episode is sponsored by Depot, the build acceleration platform that's on a mission to make all builds near instant. If you're tired of watching your builds in GitHub Actions crawl like the modern-day equivalent of paint drying, give Depot's GitHub Action runners a try. They're up to 10 times faster with unlimited concurrency, faster caching, support for Linux, macOS, and Windows, and they plug right into other Depot optimizations like accelerated container image builds and remote caching for Bazel, Turbo Repo, Gradle, and more. Depot was built by developers who are tired of wasting time waiting on builds instead of shipping. It's made for teams that want to move faster and stay focused on what actually matters. That's why companies like PostHog use Depot to cut build times from over 3 hours to just 3 minutes, saving tens of thousands of build hours every week. Start your free 7-day trial at depot.dev and let them know we sent you.